You don't get the other interpretation. The other interpretation would be Andoryu-san. Andoryu-san. Senko wa sugaku desu ka? So you could say, Andrew, is your major math? Yeah. So I would say, Andoryu, Sanko wa sugaku desu ka? Right? You would pause. You would say, Andoryu-san, as in like you're addressing the person, and then go about it. But instead, they made it reverse addressing. And then this phrase is asking if Andrew's major is math. So you could be addressing someone else, a non-Andrew. So you're asking a question to a non-Andrew. Yeah, it's more the wa or ga for possessiveness. Yeah, exactly. So it's a little weird. It really, in the end of the day, I don't think it matters that much. What I mean is, it's up to personal preference, right? In this way, there's some flexibility and utility, and we're getting into this misty gray area, and I kind of like it. It tells me that I don't know how to say this, but I know stuff like this could get like upsetting to some people who want to know right and wrongs, right? But to me, if a language can do this between two languages, it gives me the idea that it's flexible enough to be interesting. As in, like in English, you can ask that. Yeah, it is. It happens with dual. I don't think it's a dual problem, is what I'm saying again, which is what you're playing into my right and wrong thing. So I don't think it's a problem because it lacks context. And what lacks context to me, some people might say I'm excusing Duo for its flaws. And that's fair. It would be a flaw thing if you wanted comprehensive things. But generally, I'm imagining the many situations only because it's flawed, not because it's not flawed. If it's not flawed, then I would likely more be inclined to remember one way instead of questioning it. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. Yeah, Duo prompts are very low context. There's just no context whatsoever. Yeah, you always have to introduce the subject, even though it's implicit in conversation. Exactly. That's something that Duo doesn't do either. So Duo does Duo things, and they do combination, right? They do combinatorial. So what I mean is, they take this, put it here for one lesson, then they put it at the end. Prepositional phrases come before, can go at the end and the beginning. What they do is they take 1, 2, then do 2, 1 at any of the orders. And to me, in Japanese, often you address the person first. You introduce the subject first. They are the most important thing in a lot of things, right? So you acknowledge the person, you introduce. It's kind of like English. I actually do this quite a bit, where like if I had to choose to put the subject or like an emphasis on the subject, if it's comparing a human and a location, I tend to emphasize the human being before the rest of the location. So is Andrew with you? As if I'm talking to someone, you could say, is Andrew with you? Or are you with Andrew? Right? So you have to make those choices. And oftentimes, depending on the situation, you can gravitate towards them. But the actual question itself technically doesn't change the meaning, so to speak, like grammatically. Right? And I like that. I kind of like that. It can be very frustrating. I think the people who use words like dead dead sentence construction, I get it. I definitely get it. For me, this was the most interesting thing from yesterday because it wasn't clear cut. I know that sounds a little masochistic, but sometimes you get context, you get a lot of context everywhere else. So I'm curious when I would ever say this phrase. I'm challenging myself to really figure out if I would ever say this. Is your major math, Andrew? I generally put Andrew first. I would say, Andrew, is your major math? Or you could even be, and I wouldn't go more direct than that. Honestly, if I had to pick, I would say Andoryu-san. Nani? No. Andoryu-san. Senko. Nani? Senko wa nani desu ka? What is your major? I would probably use this. So even when we're talking about these types of structure, I probably would say like Andoryu-san, you know, senko wa nani desu ka? I think that works, right? Or do I have to use a different version of nani? I don't know yet. I'm not very confident in that type of thing at the moment. But I'd probably just ask Andrew what their major is. And I wouldn't say, what is your major, Andrew? I wouldn't say that either. I would say Andrew first. I would address the person. When do I go back to the game I played? Every Monday. Every Monday is a reset day for that. I don't know. What's your preference, Lotus? What would you do? And there's something weird about this that I feel uncomfortable. I don't think I like... I am not the biggest fan, so call me pedantic, but as much as I like the whole inference, you know, like being redundant, inference and implied stuff, I get it. It's very useful. It might sound a little pedantic or whatnot, but I like reinforcing words. Like in English, which most people do as well, right? In Japanese, they do the same, where if you're implying the subject in conversation, you don't bring them up anymore. Like, don't bring it's awkward to bring them up again, right? However, in English, people do that too. Like, when you turn into casual, you actually use a lot of implicitness. But I deliberately go the opposite direction in English. So maybe this will be a thing that I choose to be different. But in English, I would continue to use subjects like I, you, as an emphasis. Like, as opposed to shortening it, like saying, that's good, right? That's good. That's good. For example, I would say, I think that's good. So I will continue to establish that the difference between some think that's good. Even though regardless if both people know who they're talking about, I will still continue to clarify using this stuff. And a lot of times, in Japanese learning, some people say, oh, the first mistake, or the weird, like, awkward thing that Americans do is they want to input the subject in a sentence. uh, and you know, subjects are inferred a lot of times in their early statements, right? And oftentimes this is because of a need, due to the like the English writing system, right? The whole like subject, verb, object thing. And I disagree with this fundamentally because I'm not thinking about grammar. I'm thinking about specificity. In this day and age, there is a lot of miscommunication. And oftentimes miscommunication comes with the lack of, dare I say, inculcation. Constantly language keeps getting pushed for efficiency, right? Efficiency over and over again. So you start truncating and inferring and implying and using lots of contextual stuff. And I talked about this earlier when people said they like the Japanese language because you don't assume a lot of things. But in fact, I found that contrary to my feelings, Japanese assumes a lot of things. And so does English. It's the user of the language that's making the assumption, not necessarily the culture and the people are making the assumptions, not necessarily the writing system. The writing system can still support being pedantic, as in you can say watashi no, watashi this, watashi that, anata this, anata that. The language itself, the system itself can support being pedantic. The culture and the people are making it less pedantic. However, because I'm an English user, I gravitate towards being pedantic. That is different from being concise. However, it can sort of sound like being more concise. So like, I think this is a great idea. Meanwhile, that person is talking about themselves or some other opinion. Oh, some people believe this to be the case. However, the majority of the people believe this to be the case, while a minority believes in a counterexample. However, I feel like this is personal, right? Meanwhile, when I'm talking to the other person, they're talking, they share an opinion, and they don't specify whether it's their opinion, someone else's opinion, or like their family's opinion, whoever the opinion is, and it's inferred most of the time. And often that leads to an incredible amount of miscommunication because the person that they're talking to, the social norm that they're talking to is, oh, I figured you already understood that I'm expressing my opinion, right? And Japanese does this a lot already. And yes, it works really well if everyone is Japanese or if everyone has the same cultural and social norms. But as your language expands to other cultures and other people, right? Other people learning your language. My take on this is that as a person who speaks English, I gravitate towards being pedantic because I can't rest on the assumption and the comfort that everyone has the same implicit inferences I have. And that's where the Japanese language had become a little bit of a weird philosophical and cultural clash with me. I really didn't expect this so soon, but lots of the inferences, like yes, we talked about aru and iru, what is animate and what is not animate, what is considered polite but still business, what's considered distant, being polite means being distant, that kind of thing comes up a lot. But we're also talking about a language that's almost exclusively monocultural, and the people who want to learn the language assumes adherence and assimilation into that monocultural implication. English doesn't do that anymore because there are more people outside. So whenever an American expresses something, they would be challenged for their perceptions of their own language, right? The language that they use. And then if you go to Great Britain, you're going to be challenged with the perception of UK's English. So now I'm at this really weird intersection where I like to use languages to be intentionally pedantic versus being efficient. I know that a lot of people say being efficient also leads to being concise, but that is not true. That is not wholly true. If the person is being pedantic, sure, being efficient will make them cut out extra words and be more concise, but they're not one-to-one. These characteristics in a language are not one-to-one ratios. They're often misunderstood. Like when you write a sentence, right? When you write a sentence, I like sports or something. And then you say something like soccer, sorry international folks. Soccer is fun. Right? Because of the context of I, you're likely to think that you're saying I think soccer is fun. Because the first one said I like sports. So it follows that I think soccer is fun. However, you could be saying other people think soccer is fun. Right? Or I agree with other people that other people think soccer is fun, or both I and other people think soccer is fun, and sometimes people truncate it to we. Just so you know, we and both I and other people have two different meanings. It's a subtlety of English, right? So what is the difference between saying we and both I and other? You're saying you separately think it's fun. That's implicating that you may not necessarily think of why it's fun the same way that other people do. When you say we, you're collectively representing a lot of people who you probably don't know. So in English, much like I'm worried about Japanese, lots of people say we. In what capacity? It's not concise enough. This is not concise. It is efficient. It is efficient for sure, right? It is efficient. And also presumptuous. So these types of language is like pervasive now in English, especially on the internet. We. So we, does that mean both you and your followers, as in those who agree with you, or you and parasocial people, as in people who don't know you exist, right? Or we, as in figuratively approximate. So many of these involve being concise. So a lot of times conciseness means you become less efficient. So for example, when I try to describe statistics, the word count goes up. Word count goes up. It doesn't go down. It doesn't become more efficient. Conciseness doesn't necessarily mean reduce your word count and then use words that are far more like hard to understand, multiple meanings, like not to use more sophisticated words. Conciseness is an art of removing miscommunication. But it's ironic. It was a little ironic to me because a language that is constantly characterized as being exact, right? Quite exact doesn't lead to more conciseness, in my opinion. It actually predicates on presumptions. And as someone from outside, I think a lot of the miscommunication that people talk about when like, oh, using certain words and using other words, it's gonna be there because it's a language that operates on so many presumptions, and these are the rules that gives it that exact feeling. But I think it's a kind of a funny feeling I'm getting. And you're wondering like, what does this all have to do with this? It's exactly what I'm experiencing now. When I see, is your major math, Andrew, and I'm asked to say a Japanese phrase, I'm going to say a Japanese phrase in a certain manner of speak, and it may end up being more English, but more so in a reflection, I guess, my pushback or habit of being more concise. And that may come at odds to the Japanese culture. As in, like, it's gonna make me sound weird. But naturally, I don't want to make these inferences. I really don't. Like, for example, inferring that I have to be casual speak with someone I hold dear. Right? And it's tough because I'm not Japanese. So, that's kind of one of those things that I'm tackling right now. Like, I still speak a very, it might be like some people might say, oh, it's a loss in translation because you want to show your endearment by using casual speak. That's fair. I understand it. And I'm probably going to try to do that, to behave like Japanese culture. But the moment I leave Japan, in my opinion, or not in Japan, or maybe not even talking to a Japanese, to a non-Japanese Japanese speaker, like my friends, like, or people I'm gonna meet in the future, I'm going to use formal Japanese because it resonates with my culture, the culture that I have a background. So the question is, does this become what someone mentioned before, fake Japanese? Much like how Chinese food, right? This came up before. Fake Chinese food is not fake Chinese food. It's American Chinese food. As in, you adjust the thing you know how to do to the new culture. It's pragmatic. So I like being very formal with all my fellow Japanese English speakers because they can interpret it as me being incredibly formal. I'm a very formal person. And you might be thinking, well, Japanese people would think you're very distant and stuff. It's like, I am very distant. Like, it takes a lot for me to form a relationship with someone. I mean, like, that is kind of the Asian thing, really. My social norm is that if I'm going out of my way to be formal with you, I care about you, but it takes a very long time to be casual. So there's so many like layers of self-contradiction here that I'm kind of struggling with, in a sense, where like I think I will typically always speak in the formal because I feel so distant from the Japanese culture when it comes to their approach to demonstrating endearment with casual speak. I do still use casual speak a lot in English. However, it comes with great lengths. So many things. I think it's so rich, the idea of keigo, and what was the other one, like tai keigo, like even higher than that. So that's really cool. It got me thinking quite a bit. It got me quite thinking a lot. I think the hyper inference is I see the consequences of English. However, I'm curious if Japanese will follow the same miscommunications, or any other language that ends up approaching and caressing the 50-50 mark, right? Maybe another 10 years, maybe in another 10 years due to like expanded internet culture, that Spanish and French, that's where the rates are coming. And I'm gonna put this in quotes, Indian, of Indian origin. I don't know about Chinese. I think Chinese's rate isn't high enough. In another 10 years, when their non-native actually then exceeds 50%. Sorry, it's the other way around. Exceeds 50%. I'm really curious how these languages are going to adopt the same thing that I'm talking about with English. Like how their systems and writing systems gonna adjust to the thing that's facing English, which is that culturalisms and the people using the language is defining the behavior of the language. So like what happens when you talk to a European person? They could be coming from a country that uses direct language. So when they use English, they use verbal, like their diction and their way of communicating is incredibly direct, right? And that changes the rules, what we call the social norms, right? And social norm behavior are part of any language that has like 80% or more of native speak. They have social norms, and those social norms are treated like rules, as opposed to English, which who's dictating the social norms? Definitely not Americans, not American English speakers, because whenever they say something, the first comment you get probably is, not all of us speak American English are in the United States, right? So it's a talk about culturalism and the people using the language most of the time, not the language itself. And Japanese has a long way, so the stuff that I say, technically I will probably I'll try to assimilate the Japanese cultural uses of their language, as opposed to this word that I swear people use so often now. I've been bombarded on YouTube, so this is kind of my story for today, I suppose. It's not long enough for digression, but the use of the word real and fake came up multiple times. Like, oh, hey, don't use a textbook. Textbook teaches you fake Japanese. Real Japanese sounds like this. Like, don't learn this because that's fake English. You don't want to learn fake English from Americans. You want to learn real English from British people. Just like someone who would throw and say they're fake Chinese stuff and real Chinese stuff. This is English in a nutshell. And it's not the idea that these words are ambivalent, or ambiguous in English. It's the culture and the people behind the use of these words. Like for other places in the world, being fake is not necessarily offensive, or being fake doesn't mean not genuine. And then there are places where being fake is not genuine, right? So these meanings and rules of using these words have become hyper realized in the native countries, in the countries of origin, which one of them is America or the United States and the UK. They've become like a little bit hyper aware because of its exposure of its language to all the other ones. So now everyone has a say in what the social norm is of word usage. Let's see what happens to Spanish, French, possibly Hindi. It's not going to happen to Japanese anytime soon because Japanese language learners are incredibly passionate and they assimilate as opposed to, I don't have a better word, but deviate. I guess the word is deviate. Instead of assimilating, they become, I guess, specializing. So there's not a big enough population to be like, I'm in Japanese, like a English Japanese speaker, for example. There's not enough to constitute another social norm, another niche. So all my consumptions of recent language stuff, that's where it's coming from. Maybe I'll make this into a digression. Yeah, let's pull the trigger. Let's talk more about this, right? Actually, that's about all I have to say. No, we're fine. It's related to this topic. I'm looking forward to leave it on a very interesting, fun note, right? I don't want to make it sound negative or positive because I'm indifferent. It is an adaptation of the human condition, right? If a lot of people are like you, you'll create social norms around you, right? And I'm looking forward to the next 10 years. I'm curious how the intersection of popularity intersects with the human condition and how that affects the social norms and cultural uses of different languages. It's so fascinating. If I hadn't started learning the Japanese language, I would not be so enthralled and intrigued by the current social and cultural drift that is facilitated by language use or reflected in language use. Constantly we talk about like regional censorship or regional sensitivity to the English language, largely because there are many regional English things, so everyone has an opinion, right? I'm curious in the future what that will be like when the norm is to have regional differences in social norms in English. When English is not the only language, specifically, to have enough micro communities or even competitive macro communities, right? Oftentimes you don't have this duality. As far as I am concerned, English is one of the longest competitive dualities of their usage. Great Britain and American English, right? American English, British English, right? That rivalry has now splintered into many more rivalries, right? So they're competing and talking about social norms against each other to like keep in check and whatnot. And maybe the language will become all of that. I don't know. But probably the next closest thing could be like, I don't know, Cantonese and Mandarin, right? So I'm so curious. And then you have Spanish. Spanish has essences of that because Spanish is the next one. I'm not so sure about French. I don't know enough about French, but in terms of Spanish, we don't have to talk about Spanish, about their specialization, right? There's enough of Spanish around to constitute a rivalry and competitive social norms. I mean, it goes beyond Hispanic and Spain, right? Latin America and Spain. And then we even have Portuguese, right? Brazil and Portugal. So as languages expand, I'm curious when we'll reach, I'm going to say 10 years. I'm going to give it 10 years when the norm is to have disagreements about a parental language versus right now, in my opinion, statistically, you are still more likely to have a homocultural perspective on language, as in this is the right way and this is the wrong way to use, quote unquote, our language, right? And Japan is probably going to continue to be one of those countries. And I can't wait to start going into Mandarin, which is kind of in between Spanish and Japanese when it comes to like diaspora adoption, like things that deal with dispersion of people, and then regionally confined learners, right? Culturally removed, dispersed from the origin, right? So, and then we'll hit Spanish, and it will probably be a very, very night and day experience with Spanish, because it comes with the expectations and the exceptions that social norms may vary quite a lot. In English, it's the wild, wild west. It's messy because whoever you talk to is likely going to vary substantially in dialectal use, right? Diction, and it's been a wild ride. I think Japanese couldn't be more culturally monocultural than coming from any other language than English. I think a lot of the difficulties actually is rooted in the usage and the nuances that we keep referring to. I don't necessarily think it's due to the mechanic use of the language system or the grammar. I know this might be a little hot takey, and yeah, we're gonna put this as like a 30-minute video in my talk. My thought is maybe in another 10 years or so, Japanese will materialize into something else where they will adjust, because you can already see the influence of katakana, right? The system that writing to adapt and be able to change with outside influence. So katakana it's a formal system that allows the adoption. English, on the other hand, technically there isn't like a formal distinct thing, but what English does is the rules that didn't exist in its majority tends to be something that is adopted. Like when things violate the statistical norm, but it's become so eclectic now, it's difficult to even discern what is an adopted mechanic and what isn't, like mechanistically, right? And I'm looking forward to how Spanish adjusts to its global influence. French, Japan, you can kind of see it, but I earnestly think because of its culturalism, conformity is far more exuding in their culture. So when you learn Japanese, it's about capturing and being able to live in the nuance of their language, not our language. That's very different perspective. You're not adopting Japanese into your lexicon. You're joining the lexicon of Japanese people. You are joining their community. You aren't becoming a contributor of it, right? So that's, in my opinion, a way different experience. It's such a different experience learning Japanese. When you learn English, it's often like, oh, well, all right, but can I say it this way? It's like, sure, you can. Of course. But the people around you, do they say it that way? Sure. Then that's the way you say it. Wherever you are, you have enough people around you to reinforce a specific diction and use of the English language. Certainly, if you go up to someone and try to join a community like you would do Japanese, for example, you're in Germany and you learn English, right? You're in Germany and you learn English and you learn around your community. So there will be social norms. But certainly you can still go out and into like USA's community. Then you're doing what Japanese learners have to do. Like 99, like over 90% of Japanese learners have to do this. They have to transition out of their community, right? They have to leave their community and enter another community. So you are joining a community. You aren't expanding your existing community. In English, usually the community that you have can almost outweigh the community that you may or may not want to go into. It's not obligatory for a German person who's learning English to sound like an American speaker. It's not mandatory. Like you don't have to like suddenly lose whatever social norms you have in English. It's actually quite acceptable because like I said before, the US community in American English is smaller. It's smaller than the rest of the world now. It's smaller than the rest. So their populations are sufficient enough where they constitute a large enough population that they could stay in here. So you have Chinese English, right? You have, I met a person who made this excuse, like rationale, like Dutch English. Dutch English is incredibly direct, and at the current time, I represent even in the United States, it's broken up into regions, right? So I just happen to be part of that region of the population where my diction is very indirect, right? In fact, the whole direct versus indirect thing is kind of splintered the United States in half. It's like 50-50. For every one person who's incredibly indirect or trying to preserve political correctness, there might be one who's very direct and in your face. So even that is splintered. So due to the variance, and this is, you might be thinking like, well, other countries can do this too. Yeah, but it's very accentuated in the United States because of its mosaicism, or most people would use the word diversity prone, because I am part of that situation, and that's painted my kind of colored my perspective on learning Japanese. I get the whole like appreciation for nuance, and I love that. Now I'm kind of curious. I'm always that I tend to be that guy where when I learn something, I want to leave a part of myself in it. Like what am I contributing to it? I like being a contributor. I don't like being a peddler or a panderer. So yes, I really love the nuance of the Japanese culture. And I'm saying Japanese culture because part of the culture, it's its language. At the same time, I want to bring some of the English, and specifically the American English. And this is going to be a hot topic because people don't like this. I totally understand the whole idea of purity, heritage. I get it. I understand. Like preservation, purity, preservation, heritage. One thing I have to say about that is when it comes to the human condition, the most rewarding thing about living and being part of the human line is being a contributor. So even cultures change, right? Cultures change. As to humans, it's a human condition. And when humans want to be sort of significant, they want to find some significance. at some point, right? And closure. And because of my desire to want to contribute something, I started this Duolingo thing, right? And all these conversations that I'm having, digressions and stuff, is my way of trying to indirectly contribute something without adulterating, is what the word a lot of more direct and aggressive people would say, adulterating something that's pure, something that is incredibly wonderful in its isolated state. So obviously, when I say indirect, is I'm not going to go out of my way to go to Japan and tell them what to do. It's their culture, it's their language. So naturally, with the most humblest respect I can have, yesterday's conversation about like Japanglish, right? I constantly worry about the comments I make online. I'm one of the things that make this less like not as important is because I'm not a main character. I am not a main character, and I usually don't hold myself as a main character, right? So I really hope that, for better or for worse, I fear that one day the things I say about like Japanglish and hybrid language use may resonate with people. I don't want to necessarily make it so that it is wrong to be a preservationist, a purist, and a heritage, like a heritage-focused person, right? Much like I like my lifestyle of being a generalist. It's not to say that people shouldn't strive to be specialists, right? The reason why I embrace my lifestyle as a generalist is generalist people are exploratory. They like learning and discovering new things more so than a specialist. Now, if you compare you as a specialist with you as a generalist, you're more likely to spend a disproportionate amount of time focusing on the things that you're very good at, that you focus on due to happenstance or whatever self-interest. A generalist is often, to me, kind of necessary. This idea of generalist idea is kind of necessary to even consider language learning. Largely, if your language is English, right? You don't really it's very difficult to make an argument for how much return am I getting if I continue to dedicate more time to learning another language, right? So that pragmatism tends to rear its resistance for trying to expand your cultural understanding and language learning. So to me, I may seem more appealing when it comes to talking about approaches to acquiring a new language or something like that. But at the same time, I sleep at night and I'm about to go to bed and I look on YouTube algorithm and I get slammed with like 40 or 50 YouTubers who are far, far more influential. In fact, they might represent gold standards, and they're largely insurmountable oppositions to what I just said now about the idea of being a contributor and creating alternative language learning environments that takes on a life of their own, right? Because what it would do is it would create competition to the purity and preservation of whatever the social norms of a language is. And I have to accept the idea that I will constantly feel this way because I speak English. I read and speak English. If there are other native English speakers out there, or maybe even native-like people who have their own communities, naturally you would understand in the sense that everyone has an opinion on the English you speak, largely because you belong to a community that is also separated from maybe a larger community or an opposing or competitive community that speaks the same language, technically. And it might get to the point where the English diction is so desperate that it's hard to understand each other. There are examples of that already in existence, where the diction and not necessarily the writing conventions and the sound and the alphabet, they don't differ, but the diction is so desperate that it is very difficult to understand for a quote unquote, a lot of people call it a rudimentary language. Well, my only thought as a generalist, someone who's focused on bigger pictures rather than the finer nuances, I suppose, in specializing, it doesn't take a far step back to see that the language that is most difficult is the language that has the, in my opinion, the biggest diversity in social norms, cultural users, and almost proportional competition in their use, because that creates noise. It creates quote unquote infighting on what is the social norm. So when you go out and say things like this, like we talked about this so often when learning Japanese, like how would you express this in Japanese? And you can actually come to a consensus still. This is a really, really exceptional time to learn Japanese, because even though the people who are joining the Japanese community, right? Japanese learners are joining the Japanese community. You see online like, oh, when I use this, when do I use this? Even among that noise, and it's a good way, it's an endearing way, like the nuances, you can still largely come to a consensus about usage of Japanese expression, right, in Japanese. Then I start thinking, well, what if these people, the Japanese people, go and learn English? And my only thought is chaos. So here's my take on it. I would love to see that the Japanese community itself has their own English learning community. But the thing is, in Japan, their culture is kind of refractory to the culture necessary to create a secondary English-speaking population. Like, much like in the United States, there's not enough in my opinion to transition into the internet culture to constitute a secondary Japanese speaking community, right? And lots of times we focus on what is undesirable about this. What's undesirable is it creates more noise and more chaos, for sure. What's beautiful that comes out of this too, to offer a counter, to lighten the chaos, is that out of chaos, with competition, there's global appeal. And global appeal increases influence. So yeah, these are at odds with each other, right? When you have a secondary Japanese community elsewhere, which I don't think it's big enough in any single place, the largest right now is the United States and Brazil. the secondary Japanese communities are largely trying their best to adopt and assimilate Japanese culture because it's not big enough to constitute competition. But one of the wonderful things about that is competition and alternative things kind of a lot of times grow a language for the sake, like, growth in the sense of it becomes more inclusive, right? And it becomes more dynamic. But because it becomes more dynamic, it becomes more chaotic, right? And there's definitely one language we all can, a lot of us can probably agree on, is that English is incredibly chaotic, incredibly messy, incredibly dynamic, because everyone has a community they belong to that doesn't necessarily be the community that represents and the language itself. There are rarely a case where when you say something online, per se, they're like, oh yeah, those are the rules. This is how you do this. Or you might have 2 or 3 disagreements, like 2 or 3 bigger noted things, and then you ascribe it to Japan, right? When it comes to Japanese. In English, the comment is negation. You use the negation. Well, I'm not American. Well, I'm not British, right? Because there are way more other communities you could be referring to. In Japan, it's like, well, you're not Japanese or you want to be Japanese. It's not, well, you want to be American who speaks Japanese. It's different than, oh yeah, us Dutch speak English differently. That you can't say that for Japanese. You say, do you speak Japanese? Do you sound Japanese? And do you behave like Japanese? Because you're speaking their language. You're not speaking your version of their language. You're speaking their language. So this whole sense of belonging is so interesting. It's so fascinating. And also, I am incredibly... I don't share my insecurities too often. So here's an insecurity. I have always contemplated. My mania tends to be rooted in my unintentions, right? A lot of times control, my control over life tends to provide me with a lot of happiness and consistency. In a way, I've learned over my life to quote unquote cope or manage my mania pretty well due to rationalization of control. However, when it comes to content creation, language, this has become a lot tougher. I think games are pretty microcosmic, right? Pretty microcosmic. So like if you alienate a gaming community, you can negotiate and leave that community and never come back. It's not essential, right, to many people's identities. Not too much, not as much. But then when we get to language, I start worrying about the unintentional consequences of my ruminations, especially this one. This one is quite controversial. My behavior yesterday, or my behavior and suggestion yesterday when I was playing Neverwinter Online, like using Japanglish, and offering alternative ways of bridging communication and learning implicitly, is one that is going to gather quite a lot of opposition in the future. If I am to be someone who is very responsible for my words, regardless of my influence in the present day, perhaps my influence will grow in the future, and that discussion comes up again, I want to earnestly take responsibility for it and explain and express that I feel incredibly insecure about the state of learning a language from a conformist society versus a language that is completely non-conformative. As in, you will get unanimous opposition all the time when you're learning a language that has a monocultural appeal. As in, even the language learners themselves will obligatorily adopt the social norms, or attempt to, as much as they can. So why is that important? Is because a lot of things I say in learning Japanese has been met with exactly this behavior. And I don't necessarily want to embrace that. I don't think I will contribute much to that. So naturally, there might be unintentional animosity, right? I've already experienced this already. Duolingo Japanese is asking for trouble. So I want to make it very clear that I do things to offer alternatives. Because I lived a life where I'm marginalized most of the time. And marginalized, meaning words like fake, is marginalizing. So I care about people who are marginalized. And when you're learning Japanese, you are marginalized by default. If you're not Japanese, you're in the minority, you're marginalized. So you can choose to join the gang or not. And for me, I love looking at Japanese people. I love how they enjoy themselves. I personally don't want to be Japanese. I want to contribute though. I want to be like, I want to show that being closer with an English person, an English speaking person, also bridges this compromise. Like, so we meet halfway, But what happens is it creates that adulteration that most people are worried about, like losing identity. So this is commensalism, or not really commensalism, but a mutual assimilation, right? You're adopting something here, you're adopting something there. And a hybrid is often frowned upon. I don't even know how to spell frown. Is this how you spell frown? Frown upon than being the two purest things. Well, that comes with my background. I'm not that. So to humbly and respectfully, when I say Japanglish and Spanglish and how I learn language, I don't want to use the word that most people keep telling me and calling me over my life being fake, or this word, which is associated incredibly with the American lifestyle. So that word, and it comes up a lot. For every one video that talks about synergistic and highlighting synergistic culturalisms, complementing each other, or hybrid systems, or compartmentalizing, there are hundreds of these words: fake, real. I'm not gonna verbalize, like audioly verbalize. I'm not a fan of saying this word, but like a non-authentic approach, right? Things like that. Hey, S1, konnichiwa. I see that you used the kana for wa instead of the kana for ha. There. Kon ni chi it wa. So wa, this wa, as opposed to this wa. How are you, S1? So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about, because I was reflecting upon it yesterday. I have mania all the time, and sure enough, that comes with influence. And I really worry. I worry a lot about the responsibilities, right? So I don't want to be the person that strongly suggests there is a right or wrong way of doing things. And that will definitely come back many, many times when it comes to Japanese. In fact, it's kind of funny. I think it's a funny extra layer of meta here, that the adoption of Japanese mannerisms, right? The passionate Japanese community, it's reflected in how they study and learn Japanese as well. So, study and learning Japanese, the expectation is to immerse yourself in the Japanese culture and understand its mannerism in order to understand its mannerisms. So the funny thing is that also happens with their study and learning habits. Well, have you heard Japanese people speak English? And what I mean by that is, I'm pretty sure that there will eventually be an English Japanese or Japanese English speaking micro community, like their own version of their speaking communities, because while you might be focused on pronunciation, right? Pronunciation and like writing and vocabulary and stuff, I can earnestly tell you, if you listen to a Japanese person's diction, you can tell they're Japanese. And what I mean by that is, as I'm learning Japanese, I'm becoming more and more inclined to understand even deeper what the Japanese English diction is like. I even said that in myself, where my English is becoming Japanese-like over time. I'm using phrases that I don't use in American colloquialism. But because I'm learning Japanese, I'm getting a lot of it. It's becoming very apparent that I'm using a lot of the different types of diction that if you were a Japanese person learning English, you will adopt those diction because the people around you are also learning English, right? There are other Japanese people around you learning English. The double standard here, it is a double standard, but not necessarily a double standard because there's population differences, is that when an English person, like myself, an American English person, have English Japanese speaking tendencies, that would be constituted as wrong. It'll be wrong, it'll be ignorant, it'll be possibly offensive, disrespectful, not serious, casual, fake, and then that B word. Largely because the vast majority of people who speak English, who's learning Japanese, has chosen to adopt the Japanese culture in order to understand their language. Personally, in my opinion, based on a lot of anecdotal evidence, I suppose, when I hear Japanese people speak English, they're not adopting American culture. They're using American words in English and projecting Japanese culture. Much like their writing system, katakana, right? For borrowed words, it's projecting Japanese out through those words. And there are evidences in the in American English, there are words that have become part of the American lexicon that is used in the American sense, as opposed to wherever the origin of that word is. Like, for example, I know I'm going to get flack for this. A sandwich. Like a sandwich. I don't even know if sandwich is a, I don't know where this word came from, but I can tell you now, when you say a sandwich, an American is projecting something different. That like an American is projecting something different regionally in a sandwich. So in Japanese, when we're saying kona, right? Kona, that's a section of a room, but it's also an aisle. It's, you know, like there are lots of words like chiketo. Chiketo may be specific to the Japanese projection of a chiketo. What is another version of a check? A bill. And I think they use it for that too. Pretty sure at some point. They also use it for a lot of other things. So chiketo sounds like a check. You don't go and buy checks at an amusement park. You go and buy tickets at an amusement park. Right? So they're exuding their English diction from their culture. They're not adopting American culture. So to me, that's kind of one of the really weird experiences that I'm having, and I love it. It's such a different way to learn a language. In English, you learn it and adopt it to your culture. In Japanese, you learn it by adopting their culture. So you're assimilating Japanese culture. You have the desire to assimilate the Japanese culture. All the examples of this language exist in that context. There's no multiple contexts. So when you're learning English, for better or for worse, you have to decide which culture you're going to use as a reference. So are you going to use an American speaker as your reference for your English? So then you end up sort of adopting their things, or are you gonna adopt your neighboring people? And for me, I think the internet is big enough, humbly speaking, that instead of wanting to be a Japanese learner, wanting to be Japanese, wanting to be native-like, I personally love it if I am able to contribute and bridge and celebrate that both English and Japanese can meet halfway and accommodate each other. So what will that look like? Well, when I go to Japan, I'm obviously going to behave appropriately and try my best to remember all of the nuances. However, online, when I'm operating outside and I'm usually largely talking to other people who speak English, we already have enough disagreements about how we use English. Why is Japanese any different? Right? I'm asking myself that. Well, if a Japanese speaker approaches me, I will, as politely and formally as I can, express in Japanese that I am an interested English speaker who loves your language, but I also want to imbue it with Englishisms because I'm an English person. I'm not a Japanese person. So I would love to be able to be respected mutually for using your language to reach out to more English speaking people and English reading people. Maybe do some Japanglish to make it so that Japanese, to show that Japanese is it's flexible, right? Because English is heckin' flexible. It's why it's chaotic and messy. It's so flexible that you can get away, like for me, in a way, when someone spoke English in the Japanese structure, Japanese grammatical structure, Korean structure, Hindi, Spanish, Italian, when English is like just moved around, it's normal for me to hear that, right? It's normal for me to hear that on social media and stuff because people have adopted English into their own lexicon, like their own cultures. Like, oh, borrowed me a book? Oh, that's fine. Like, yeah, I get that. I certainly wouldn't say it among my Americans. You know, like imagine going up to someone and say, borrow you a book. The expression for the American lexicon or diction is loan you a book. You loan things to people as opposed to borrow things to people, right? So all this stuff comes up so regularly that it has become normal in English. It's the whole embrace the chaos kind of. S1, you're still learning. I use Duolingo, but my main study resource is another online tool. Oh, what is it? Yeah, what is it? I'm curious. Are you using, there are a lot. So I know I'm aware of 7 or 8. And then supplemental ones and more complementary. So what are you using outside of Duolingo? S1. I am also using a lot of things, but Duolingo is my major inspiration for all the things. I can't use the word main and too much. Main would suggest something is more valuable or prioritized, which I can't really say if Duolingo is more valuable or prioritized over anything else. I use different sources. So they're apples and oranges. So main would constitute an overlap, in my opinion. So you're making comparable comparisons. But I do use, I'm going to say 4 to 5 tools. However, they usually don't overlap. They're non-overlapping tools. So what Duolingo doesn't use, these tools take care of, so to speak. So it would be misleading if I say Duolingo is a main thing, but it is a main source of inspiration. And that inspiration itself is measurable in all the tools. All the tools inspire me to do some things. So technically, most of my time is on Duolingo for inspiration. In terms of like the context of fluency, which most people are hyper attentive to, and then like words and stuff, there's not too much overlap between the tools. I don't use any of these tools to learn vocabulary, for example. Not predominantly. None of these tools provide vocabulary. None of these tools technically provide motivation in the same way. None of these are gamified. You know, whatever Duolingo offers, I usually look for tools that don't offer those things and maybe focus on other things, for example. Anyways, I want to leave the digression with a very, very conservative thing for my future. Like for people who are gonna come and talk and get angry, get not angry. I want to leave on a very optimistic beat. I feel that the world is big enough, and the world, maybe perhaps the internet, is big enough for more diversity. And that includes learning Japanese. Much like my heritage and my upbringing, specifically, I want more people to be able to experience Japanese, not just as a language, but a culture and people. And I want to respectfully and humbly say that when one is a conformist, preservationist, this often leads to gatekeeping, estranged feelings, ostracizing, but at the same time, pure, unadulterated, hardcore. right? However, it is countered by human condition. Humans want to contribute and be part of something bigger, usually. So when you have a conformist, preservational, some of it has to give way in order to welcome diversity, competition, or a better a word that a buzzword that a lot of people throw around, innovation. And innovation breeds influence. So these are at odds with each other. I feel that the internet or world is big enough for more diversity. And that diversity leads to, or is synonymous with, having a greater appreciation for something like Japanese and the people and its culture. However, with that comes exposure, innovation, competition, and that can hurt purity, unadulterated, conformist social norms. And this is the essence of the duality between, pure and diversity, right? So somewhere here, I feel the Japanese culture, there's enough room for a little bit more diversity. And that definitely is true in the end of the day for me and my journey in learning Japanese. To contrast, I haven't even started learning Spanish yet, but Spanish is a whole different ballgame. Since I can't choose English, since English is my native language, Spanish or French is a whole different ballgame in terms of their stance on the balance, the tug and, the push and pull of purity versus diversity, right? And that really shapes that type of thing. This expectation here really shapes new people learning something. This one is not a double standard. Learning new things involves the word diversification, right? If you're a purist, it's inherently going to be refractory to learning. Oh, why can't Japanese be like English? I know English. Why can't Japanese just sound like English and do like English do? So it's easy. Well, then stick with English. Right? So it's inherent. So for better or for worse, however your agenda is, I think the internet is big enough for more diversification. And that includes Japan, which Japanese is one of the biggest, one of the ones that have a great cultural understanding or a cultural influence. Great cultural influence. However, a really, really low influence when it comes to language. And what I mean by that is its language is refractory to diversification. Not as much, like I wouldn't say it's among the culturally influential groups. It does have accommodations like the writing system, right? Katakana, for example. And you can see these things. But the behavioralisms, the culture that's projected in the language for learning it is anti-diversification. And the people who adopt Japanese as this air of what I'm going to call a little bit elitism but in an endearing quality. And what I mean is this elitism is coming from a passion for preservation, because they want to be part of what they love from the outside, but they want to get in. They want to become native like and stuff. There's beauty in both, or all of the above, right? And for me, I don't resonate with that. I resonate with diversification. So yes, I will probably not reach native like ever. However, I think in another 10 years, there will be pockets of Japanese or English Japanese speakers, or I don't know, Brazilian Japanese speakers. And then Japan will have so much more interesting things to encounter, in my opinion. Like, Japanese people can even probably go to these places and feel somewhat at home, but as also be able to see the differences that have changed. Much like when people tell me that I'm a fake Chinese person living in the United States because I'm American, right? Well, I want to show you things that maybe you find interesting when you come and visit, right? A native, quote unquote, native Chinese person might find some bad things, some good things. You know what? My parents heckin' love pizza. So there's Chinese pizza. I know this is not a great example, because now all the Italian people are gonna get so upset. So we'll leave it on like a humorous note. My talk is there. I think the world is big enough where if you love your culture, I like to think a person's heart is big enough to be interested in what your culture inspires to. So like, I'm really like, on the internet, one of my favorite parts of a community, like a specific community, is how unanimous they are in bridging, like going over the hump in population. And English is one of them, where it's come to the idea that when they see something not norm to them, it becomes interesting, not immediately wrong. So when someone tells me, oh, this is how you pronounce this word, my first thought is, that's so interesting. I will have to try to say that in the future. Like when someone says a word that I'm not familiar with, or like I'm familiar with the word and the way it sounds, and they say it differently, it becomes inherently interesting, not wrong. That is the difference in mindset. So how do you encourage more people to love your language? Well, first of all, you don't tell them that they're wrong all the time, because they're not born Japanese, right? It might as well be suggesting that, like, oh, you'll never understand pitch accent because you're not Japanese. That's effectively what you're saying, as opposed to, hey, that's an interesting way to say it. I like it. Like, for example, I'm gonna trigger some Japanese people probably with this. Fashion instead of fashion, right? Fashion, not shion, right? Because like information, not information, right? So all these things, it become more like, oh yeah, that's how English people say that. That's interesting. Like, that's why I love the Japanese, learning a new language. It's interesting. It's not wrong or right. I don't want to change the Japanese language because it doesn't suit me. I like it for what it is because it's diversity. And when I learn the thing, it's going to turn out to be like a Japanese English speaker or a English Japanese speaker. And that is diversity. And there's a hyper pressure. There's a hyper pressure to reduce diversity in Japanese learning right now. A super hyper to reduce. Oh, you're going to learn Japanese, huh? Your goal must be fluency. Your goal must be to sound native like. It's like, well, no, my goal is to use Japanese and also sound like an English person using Japanese, because I want Japanese people to know that there are a lot of English speakers out there who are very interested in your language, and you have a lot of representation, and also your influencers and representatives are aggressively shutting people down because they have different accents. Your mannerisms and stuff are not as accommodating, but that's not technically true because it's only specific to the people on social media. So like someone, and ironically it's also language learners, like native like language learners are the ones that constantly unintentionally perpetuate the gold standard, which is to be Japanese, to be a Japanese speaker who has the respect of other Japanese people. You have to be like them, as opposed to loving their language because they love the language. Like, can you not be happy, in my opinion, my humble opinion, can you not be happy if someone who loves your language so much that they love the language even if they can't be Japanese ever? Because if you're telling them unintentionally, like, oh man, that sounds weird, that's not native, like, oh, you'll never be like us, unintentionally, because that's what, in my opinion, that's what you do unintentionally. That's the mania that I feel all the time. When I'm a content creator, I say something that I do in my lifestyle. I don't want to give people the impression that it is the right lifestyle or the wrong lifestyle. So I take responsibility, but it can be unintentional a lot of times because you do things automatically. What do Japanese people do automatically? They talk about what's normal to them because they represent 99% of the people that use their language. So yes, whatever their normal, their rules. That doesn't stop you from preventing a population from ever starting to be interested in your language, because your conformist unintentional behavior is putting a gate on your language. Your language is not interesting enough to get people to be motivated to learn your language because you unintentionally have high standards. English seems like an easy language now, misconceptionally, in English, easy language, because the gates are always open. There's like, people don't unintentionally peddle a gold standard in English. When was the last time you heard someone's like, oh, this is how you sound sophisticated and educated in English? Like, how many of those streams or content do you see? You generally see noise and chaos, like, this is how I speak English, this is how you speak English, and no one can agree on something. That is gates open, dude. It's all for which party are you in? Are you part of the German speaking English, English community? What community can you choose? In Japanese, I love the culture so much that I think it is going to be wonderful to see if the diversity in interest in Japanese overcomes this, in my opinion, the self-inflicted gatekeeping that is involved. Where like, oh, you're starting to learn Japanese, I hope you're super serious, and I hope you can dedicate the next 7-8 years or the rest of your life to be even considered respectful to the Japanese language. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but that's like nihilism 101. That person is going to start and they're going to, for a month, and they don't see the progress that they they quit and they forget about Japanese altogether. You kill the spark before it even happens. And mind you, the only reason I'm super interested is because I'm not focused on fluency. I'm not focused on trying to be accepted to be someone I'm not. I'm not focused on trying to be Japanese. I'm focused on trying to appreciate the Japanese language and the culture being American. So there's no pressure on me to like spend the rest of my life trying to assimilate some sort of culture that I don't even live in, right? You can become that. What are the memes? Move to Japan, become Japanese. Well, respectfully so, moving to Japanese would also invite me to an environment that is unwelcoming to someone like me. I like to innovate on rules. I like to innovate on compromises. I enjoy things changing all the time. If I go to Japan, respectfully so, it's a different type of culture. Change does not happen rapidly. Already to this day, in the United States, there's comments on how long it takes for things to change, to adapt, to innovate for the better. If you go to Japan, good luck waiting for your entire life. I'm just relatively speaking, it's the trade-off. Preservationists, purist preservationism is refractory to change. And I think this is one of the things that even the Japanese content creators are advising others, like, are you sure that you're okay with the Japanese culture? Because it can be very hard to adapt to, especially like Americans who find the romance side of the Japanese culture, the ones that are very eclectic and eccentric and whatnot. But ultimately, when you go there, your daily grinds and stuff, those expectations are incredibly rigid and strict. That's how you become Japanese. In the United States, when I say to become American, I don't even know what that phrase means anymore. Like, it's so low that if you end up coming to the United States, live long enough to get nationalized, you're effectively American. That's it. Like that's the thing that defines you. You have to speak American English? No. Like, you don't. Like, content creators with interracial couples, they're speaking British English in the United States. They have like a Italian accents like that's part of the identity. So know your culture, cultural backgrounds, and the users of that language, and then ask yourself, are you behaving like that? So in the end of the day, to end this digression, I think, in my opinion, from my experience with Duolingo and in the greater weird Japanese learning community, I think the internet has room for more diversity. More, to me, this means that there may be more smiles, more motivation for the future, for people to enjoy Japanese. I think right now, this adherence to Japanese mannerisms is crushing many other dissonant cultures in being interested enough, like being committed enough to want to go through the journey of learning Japanese. And that, in my opinion, is what's keeping down the influence of the Japanese language. And it only caters, the ones that are committed enough are, as you might have expect, the people who spend most of their childhoods exposed to things like anime. Those are the most committed and also emotionally blind. And what I mean by emotionally blind is their blinders are on, as in they love so much that they can still be committed to a crushing standard. And that's all the people that are left, in my opinion. My impression is that for every one person like me who likes learning in general, not attached to an anime or something, there's at least 5 other people who belong to this group I'm describing. It takes that much passion to be interested in your language, because the vast majority of people have such high standards of Japanese. Even native Japanese speakers, their commentary are brutally, absolutely brutally unrealistic and basically anti-diversity. As in, all the commentary that comes out of their mouth is, well, a real Japanese person doesn't do this. Oh, a real Japanese person don't say this. Oh, wow, this person is definitely not real Japanese because they say these things. Oh, this person is definitely not real Japanese because they don't do this. That is usually, in my opinion, keeping Japan pure, very pure, but also limiting its influence. Compared to Spanish, French, English, and the others. If they so choose to desire that, that's perfectly fine. And in a selfish way, that means that eventually I will quit Japanese. If the pushback is so strong that I either need to be Japanese in order to speak Japanese without getting like nailed and burned at the fire, then I will inherently quit Japanese too and embrace a language that is more welcoming to a foreigner. That's the irony here, right? Sorry for the late reply, watching from work, so I can't really... Oh, no worries. You use a textbook called Genki? I see. Genki, and a website called Japanese Pod 101. Nice. So you have... Genki is one that's geared towards English speakers. Do you like it? Are you a primary English speaker? Sometimes it's not automatically assumed. And then Japanese Pod 101, I have heard about that too. I have not used the textbook myself. S1, Genki being one of the textbooks. However, for your comparison of Japanese Pod 101, I use Tofuku. I use Tofuku in like a similar capacity probably. So I don't know if I'm gonna pick up a textbook, but one day I might actually pick up Genki just to see. You're English only and you've never learned another language at all? Nice. Welcome to the language learning. How's your experience so far? S1. I'm wrapping it up now. All right. So now we're going to go back. Diversity is important. It can help humanity understand humanity better. The human condition can too. Yes. Shizumi. Free for everyone and guilt-free. There's a lot of guilt. Guilt tripping is one of the major emotions that I get from learning Japanese. It's shockingly different than the first time I learned Spanish. Spanish was something else. It was so humbling, but at the same time so exciting and enthralling. Like, you get that feeling where like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. It'll come. Like, you know, I forgot the saying, but I forgot how to say c'est la vie in Spanish. But it's one of those things like, just do it. You know, just do it. And in English, I feel that's what I say most of the time. Like, oh, you're worried about English? Just do it. Like, go for it. But in Japanese, it's like, oh yeah, you're doing it wrong. Wait. If you continue to do that, you're screwed. Like, you got to start the right way. Don't start. You got to know how to start first. Oh, wait. Did you read all of these advice? Like, you need to get all these advice or else you're never going to appreciate it the same way. That's Japanese. Like, in my opinion, that's the Japanese learning community. Like 9 out of 10 times. Like, oh yeah, don't forget this. This is gonna ruin you later. So you want to make sure you get this right before you get confused later. Like that's the feeling I get most of the time. And it's such a different feeling, but it's also a challenge. I don't mind it, but I can earnestly say lots of people do mind that, and it's stopping them very easily. I'm a very different breed, I suppose. I'm gonna try to single myself out. I'm not that special. I think I belong to another group of people, but generally speaking, that group of people aren't the ones that would choose Japanese. Because if you're thinking about it pragmatically, you would pick a learning community that's more likely diversity forward than monoculturally forward. You are constantly treated as a foreigner and all that stuff, not meeting the standards and stuff. That happens when you're hitting a monocultural society, intentionally or not, right? So oftentimes when an English speaker asks, I want to learn a second language, what would I pick? Spanish or French? And a lot of times people would say, oh yeah, it's because Spanish and French is kind of related to English, and then there's all these rules that make it easy. But in the end of the day, it's also the cultural norms and the people who use the language and people who are teaching the language. There's not a bigger cultural dissonance between the popular and diversity forward languages. When you get into exclusive languages, then you're belonging to a specific subset of people. And for me, I don't even belong in that because I'm not a language learning person. But if you come down to science, my advice is learn as many different disciplines as you can while focusing on your core science. Because at the upper level, you need diversity in your discipline in order to innovate and improve and grow. You do not, the whole definition is illogical of growth. When you're focused on purism and preservation, that's literally anti-change. Without change, you are neither growing nor getting worse. And that's where the fear comes from, when things get worse. In my hearts of heart, humans are humans. They are obeying the human condition that they don't naturally try to make things worse. It definitely can get worse, but naturally humans don't want to strive to make it worse for them. So ultimately, in the long run, when there's innovation and growth, change happens in upward direction. But that also means losing something to time, right? So I can definitely understand that. And that's probably what is the strongest thing about the Japanese culture, is preservation. And that's a beautiful thing. And you have to ask the Japanese population, or whoever thinks they belong to the Japanese population, is it time to diversify, or is it time to dig in and continue to be left behind in the world, especially in the internet world? Being left behind might not be the greatest when you're having problems. If you're self-sustaining and really happy and your culture is happy and it's not shrinking, then yeah, you can definitely perpetuate a time of isolation and live merrily until it's not. Personally, I think Japan is probably at a precipice to diversify and not hunker down, because there are very real things that are facing Japan that aren't working. And I don't want that to happen, because I love the Japanese culture enough to say, even as a foreigner, I would like to perpetuate and encourage people to pick up Japanese at the face of all the gatekeepers, or the unintentional gatekeeping, right? Get people to learn Japanese. It's tough, and you're not going to get a lot of motivation from other people, especially those who already spent the blood, sweat, and tears caressing like 5 or 6 years. It's very unadulterated advice. Even the gold standards of people, they're not encouraging. They often say, oh, I did this for 7 years. I did this for 7 years. You got to do this. You got to move there. It did happen. Those are the truths, but it's unfilling. It's very unfilling. Meanwhile, in English, it's like, you know, did you learn a word today? Here, I'll give you a few more words. Like, whatever. You're fine. Just go on with it. Instead of this, oh, it's so hard. You must be a genius when you're doing this. Like, that's kind of the thing. They deserve the praise, but they're also not encouraging. When you see someone like that, it's like, I'll never be like that. I can't be like that. Why even bother starting now? Like, this person spent 10 years, they moved to Japan, started a life in Japan, have their raised their kids exclusively being bilingual. Those are the standards you're projecting. You're not projecting encouragement or motivation to a foreigner. You're exuding eccentricity. So those are your role models. That deserves a lot of commitment. Then naturally you're gonna hold everyone else to the same commitment. That reduces diversity, in my opinion. It's rough. Learning the grammar is different. Yeah. May I ask, did you start learning grammar? Like, how did you first start? Like, what are your focuses right now? Are you a person who wants to learn all the grammar first to find a structure? Like, how do you go about learning? I know this is the first time you're learning another language. What are your current thoughts? What was your plan? Like, your immediate plan? S1. I'm very curious because so far all the people that I've met, like most of the people that I've met, have more than one language, more than one native language, native-like language, and also they are already language learners. So not and myself included, I have already learned another language before this, so I had a lot of things to build on. Like how I learned Spanish, I adopted a lot of the things that I learned Spanish with this. So I'm not coming in with a blank, like sort of like a monolingual blank slate. And I talk about all the things that make me atypical. I speak 2 languages at home with my folks every day. So all the stuff that a lot of the commentary I'm going to make comes from that background. I don't want to give people the impression that I'm some person who has this unique insight that makes adopting a second language great. You would have to be born into my condition in order to really notice that. Alright, we're going back to our lesson. I was going to do double lessons today, but that was a great story. So I wanted to share all of that. And with that, I'm going to take a quick bathroom break. Thanks for listening, by the way, folks. Really appreciate it.